We are live. It's our first live for Tam and I on Substack. And I think we are both sort of feeling this out and seeing how things go. And hopefully we can easily see when people join us and have any questions or comments about the book, which is Daddy Issues by Katherine Angel.
I've got a slightly different copy, but also the same book.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I noticed there were two different designs of the cover.
Yeah. This one was a slightly more light-hearted cover. I feel like this cover would really confuse you if you picked the book up. Like you would think it was this light-hearted discussion of that. And then you read it and be like, my God, this is a lot more serious than I thought it was going to be.
Yes, very serious.
Your cover is more serious, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. It might be maybe a bit newer edition. I'm not sure. Mine has a foreword by Helen Sharman. But they both are UK editions, so interesting. Different designs.
Yeah, I feel like this was an edition when they maybe, there's that whole thing that they used to do with books written by women where it was putting a kind of pink cover or some flowers or something on it. I wonder if it was that, because this is the it says 1988, but it can't be. It must be more. No, first published 2019, right? Yes.
Okay. If you are joined in the chat, if you want to introduce yourself or tell us what you thought of the book, rate it out of 5 stars, we'll say, just to tell us what you thought of it, if you've read it. This is an evolution of our Estrangement book club, which we were running on Zoom, but we thought it might be easier for people to jump in and out of the book club by doing it here on Substack. So we're trying it out and hopefully it works out for everyone. And we will share the recording with subscribers after we finish. So later this week, we'll share the recording. So I guess we should get started with the discussion of the book. We thought we'd kick it off just with sort of, I guess, along the lines of the discussion of the cover, just what we expected from the book, just going in blind. And I know, Tam, you read this a while before I did, but do you want to tell me sort of what you were expecting before you read it?
Yeah, well, I would say I felt quite surprised by the book. So I was expecting, I'd just been kind of looking up books that related to fathers, because I think fathers are a bit of a neglected topic certainly within family estrangement. And I think just in families in general, I feel like fathers get an easy run of it. So I was kind of trying to find books that looked more at the father experience and not the mother experience. And this came up, and I knew it was kind of looking at the Me Too angle of fatherhood. But it goes into so many different things I wasn't expecting it to go to. But it did broadly meet what I expected it to look at, which is, I guess, in summary, the concept of if a lot of the time, recognizing that there's some lovely men out there, but if a lot of the time men can be the most dangerous creatures that we have to coexist with, how do you reconcile the person that's in your home that's also technically supposed to be the person that keeps you safe as also being this quite potentially also incredibly dangerous figure in your life and in general in the world, and how men reconcile being fathers with other things that they may do or not do, or choices and stances they take or don't take.
Yeah.
What did you expect it to be like?
I think, well, first maybe I should just read the blurb.
Oh, yeah.
I should have done that at the start. It's an essay on fathers and feminism. In the wake of Me Too, we've begun to talk more openly about the widespread harm inflicted by men on women. But little has been said about the fact that many of these men are also fathers. Bold, challenging, and nuanced, Daddy Issues examines the place of fathers in contemporary culture and asks how the mixture of love and hatred we feel towards our fathers can be turned into a relationship that is generative rather than destructive. If we are to effectively dismantle patriarchy, it is vital that fathers are kept on the hook. So, having read that, and, briefly talking with you, I, sort of knew what to expect, but I was not expecting all of the cultural touchstones that
Mm.
she uses throughout the book. I was thinking mainly of I think because of the timing when I read it, I was thinking of the former Prince Andrew, being arrested after the release of the Epstein files, and I kept thinking about his daughters, like, how they
Mm.
must be feeling, how humiliating and scary it would be to learn this about your father. I mean, I know it's it's not news at this point, something they probably knew about years ago, but just knowing that the person who raised you, in theory, probably not applicable to royal families. I imagine other people raised his daughters, but, just imagining that, your father is a predator, and that's something that came up when I was reading, Caroline Darien's memoir. Her father's Dominique Pellico,
Mm.
who drugged and raped his wife, Giselle Pellico, for 10 years. So, I was thinking about those daughters, and,
Mm.
I expected the book to sort of explore what it's like to be the daughter of a predator, I guess. S
Yeah.
so, I was way off. I think that's part of the book, but not, exactly where she goes. Halfway through, she writes, "We are alert to the daughter's daddy issues. What of the father's daughter issues?" And I
Yeah.
think that's really the crux of the book is and it's the same way we make everything about, or the woman's responsibility when so it's embarrassing if someone says you have daddy issues, right? But really, daddy issues come from the behavior of the father. So
Yeah.
we need to put the responsibility back on them. So that's kind of where I think the book went for me, what I took away from it, but we'll get into, some of the main themes, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. 100. Yeah. I agree.
So we broke it up into we I should just explain for people, you and I just made notes to each other on the aspects that we thought were most compelling in the
Mm.
book, and then we broke them into sections, and one section is the psychology or philosophy of reproduction and parenting. Do you wanna talk us through maybe some of the, philosophers or, psychologists that she references in the book and the arguments?
Yeah. Yeah. So she kind of covers uh, a book by Alison Bechdel that is quite heavily based on Donald Winnicott. And Donald Winnicott was I believe, a child psychologist who developed as in I'm pretty sure he was a psychologist rather than any other discipline. But he developed the concept of the good enough mother.
Mhm.
And one of the big bits that she riffs on a lot is Donald Winnicott's concept of the good enough mother contains this concept of this idea that you need a mother who is strong enough to withstand you hating her and wanting to destroy her.
Mhm.
Um, so it is about mothers. But I think in the book, she also, as an angel in the book, tries to talk a little bit also about how that possibly relates to fathers. And I don't know whether she explicitly explains it, but I think it can be, if you look at it from the angle that a child grows up and it needs to feel comfortable to hate and destroy and want to fight and want to reject its parent, whether it's a mother or a father, in order to firstly know that that love will stay, that there's like a stability and strength to the love. But also, some of it is around this concept of then knowing that they're real, that they're a
Mhm.
separate entity from you. Um, and I think in general, huge assumption here, but I think people feel more comfortable to try and do that with their mothers than maybe their fathers. So she then talks a little bit about how, if your father is perhaps more the disciplinarian of the family or a more frightening character in your life, then you might never go through that phase of testing their love for you.
Mhm.
And therefore they maybe never become a real person. So she talks quite a bit about this book the film I've never watched, it's quite a strange concept where there's this father that's trying to connect with his daughter. It's quite an arty film. I'm quite curious to watch it, to be
Yeah.
honest. But supposed to be this scene in the film where the father keeps showing up and he wears these different disguises, and it's sort of playful. And then one day he shows up at the daughter's party. Is everyone naked at the party? I think it's quite weird.
I don't remember, but he has on like a weird,
Yeah, he's in a weird sort of
yeah.
furry, strange outfit, and it's very. I think the point is that because it's so playful what he does, because Donald Winnicott was quite a lot about play and how play is very important for connecting with children. And I think the idea is that by him wearing this costume, being playful, he becomes other, and she can finally connect with him because it is not him. And then in that connection, he then does become real. So then have a real connection. That's a terrible explanation of it. But I think the actually more interesting bit is she talks about Alison Bechdel, who wrote this book, Are You My Mother? Which I've also not read. But my understanding of it is that in Bechdel's book, the mother is very fragile and emotionally distanced or emotionally fragile. And it's the idea that when you have a parent that is sort of unable to kind of cope with their own emotions, then instead of you ever getting to confront them about or hate them or fight them or be like, I don't like this about you, you're instead spending all your energy trying to observe them and what they're feeling and their emotions and hyper focused on them. And it means that you can't really ever work out who you are because you're so focused on them, but B, you're never going to go through that bit where they become a separate real person to you because you're so enmeshed in their feelings. I think there's a bit where they talk about like a glass house.
Yeah. And we didn't say like the whole point, according to Winnicott is and Bechdel, I guess, is the whole reason you have to sort of rebel or hate is to separate yourself, right? To become an individual. And she comes back around to that later in the book. Angel writes, if the mother forces the infant to see her, as in doesn't mirror the child, she drives the infant self into hiding. So if the mother is like unresponsive or frozen faced, not mirroring the child, not interacting, then the child's feelings aren't recognized. And instead, the child is trying to read the mother's mood and help or moderate or something, which I think ties in really well with estrangement discussions, at least in my experience and with lots of other women I've interviewed. That's a big part of the dysfunction in mother-daughter relationships is, at least I can say for me personally, I always felt that responsibility for my mom's mood and happiness and well-being. I never thought about what I wanted. I just thought like, how do I make sure she doesn't get upset or mad at me about anything? So that part really stood out to me. And then there was another section that Angel quotes from This American Life episode where someone, not named, says, if you're the kind of person who needs love, chances are you're not the kind of person who has the wherewithal to create it, which I thought was incredible because I think a lot of the reasons some people want to have kids is to feel that unconditional love, and that's not how it feels, I guess, in the beginning, or if things go wrong in the relationship. It's quite complicated the way these Bechdel and Winnicott explain it to us.
Yeah. I think the Bechdel version is, I think, for a lot of people, probably more the dysfunction that perhaps sometimes happens in a mother-child relationship, which is having a mother that is just so fragile and vulnerable or unable to have,
Mhm.
there's no one else meeting her emotional needs. You as a child are supposed to meet the emotional
Yeah.
needs. And that doesn't necessarily mean the mother's intending to do that, because like the quote you say, if you're needing love, it's probably because you haven't had that parenting either that's given you
Mhm.
that sense of knowing what love is and how to give
Mhm.
love and how to have that emotional structure within you that allows you to love someone even if they're criticizing you, even
Mhm.
if they're rejecting you, to be able to just hold steady in the love that you have. But I think the Winnicott version, which is more about the concept of needing to be angry, needing to know that it is completely safe to be like, I hate you. I
Mm.
think that is probably more the problem. Massive assumption, I haven't done like some research to prove this, but in the father-child relationship, because I think a lot of fathers can be very rigid. So if their child
Yeah.
rejects them in any way, they're like, fine, I just like, no, I'm not apologizing, I'm not talking that. And I think that fathers can be maybe sometimes, and obviously I'm sure there's loads of fathers who don't have this, and there's probably lots of mums who are more like that and fathers who are more
Mm.
like that. But as a
Yeah, but
generalization, I think
generally.
maybe fathers are the ones who can't handle criticism and rejection from their child, um,
Yeah. Yeah,
perhaps.
and we were trying to work out how exactly these, like, the good enough mother theory fits in with a book called Daddy Issues, right? And, I mean, that's kind of it. We decided we
Yeah,
think that's what Angel's point was. And also, just the fact that that responsibility falls entirely on the mom from the
yeah,
perspective of, these theories. So, the father should be taking some of that responsibility, but because we have, this idea of what a dad is, I guess, or what dads do, then they don't have the responsibility of being the one that you can say, "I hate you" to and still feel safe, or
yeah.
rejecting. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine that Angel focused on Donald Winnicott because there is no theory of fathers, perhaps,
Mm,
or there's not
yeah.
a famous one that's on the same scale as the good enough mother is.
Yeah.
So she kind of had to take it and try and apply it to a father.
Yeah.
And I do think it is the step, I think, I don't know. It's hard because I feel like we're in a quite a sea change of what fatherhood is like, and so
Mhm.
um, you, what a father is has changed really quite dramatically in some
Yeah.
respects in Western society in probably the last
Yeah.
20
Well,
years.
that was sort of our next topic is, the idea of dad as protector or dads who claim to be feminists or not.
Mm,
And, I mean, one point she she makes that I think we've all seen and understand now is, how we used to celebrate fathers who babysat their kids, um, and how that is entirely unacceptable, they're their
mm,
children. But she also says, this is page 29 for anyone following along, "New
okay.
fathers misty-eyed
Oh,
proclaiming
yeah.
feminism when they first hold their newborn baby daughter.
Yeah,
Overnight, they're transformed into heroic defenders of women's rights."
yeah.
On and on, which reminded me so much of, like, when Donald Trump was elected the first time and the second time, and when, the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, lots of people who were formerly against, abortion rights perhaps, or Trump, or I'm sorry, who were supportive, um, turned around and said, "Oh, well, I have daughters. I can't tolerate that. I understand now, why we can't have someone like that in office, or I
Mm,
understand now I have a daughter. They need to be able to make the choice about having a baby for themselves," which, to a degree I appreciate, but, like, your daughter can't be the only woman in your life that you care about, or are you that incapable of, considering
yeah,
someone else's
yeah.
experience? Um, so I think, that whole idea of fathers who are now feminists because they have a daughter is it's kind of insulting
Mm.
when you hear that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes you can kind of see that in how like some men will be, in terms of, you might, you might have like a distant relative, or like a male friend or something, where when it's their daughter, they're all like, oh, I want her to play women's football, and I want to take her, have like a daddy daughter holiday and all this
Mm,
stuff. And you're like, wow, you've been a really great dad. But then when you might look at like what social media they follow, or what how they voted, or how they talk about other things, you're like, well,
mm,
it's not very joined up, because
yeah.
you'll support your daughter playing football, but you don't actually watch women's football, or you'll only watch it as a
Mm,
performative thing with your daughter. Or
mm,
you might say, oh, I really want my daughter to be able to do anything she wants, but then you might be, a massive unquestioning fan of, don't know, old James Bond movies or something. And you think, how
yeah.
are you aligning these two different views of women, because they're quite
Yeah.
contradictory. And I can see that I do think for men, it's probably quite hard for the modern generation of men, because they're kind of in this, I mean, not hard, that's much harder to be a woman, but it's difficult in that they probably have had fathers who are so dramatically different to what they're trying
Mm,
to be as a father, and they're trying to figure it out, and they maybe don't have very good examples of how to figure it out.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I do think, yeah, there is that contradiction of, I want my daughter to do anything she wants, but have you ever voted for a woman? Have you ever,
Right.
you know,
Help to build a world
yeah, have you
for
ever
her to
hired a
have
woman in a
those role
really
models.
senior role, or is it
Yeah.
only important when it's your daughter?
Yeah. Yeah. And then Angel goes into some other cultural touchstones, which a big one for me was Father of the Bride film with Steve Martin, which I really enjoyed. I thought it was hilarious, but Angel put it in a whole new perspective,
Yeah.
because she casts it as, the idealized little girl and her dad who she adores more than anything. And then the daughter comes home with this man she is engaged to. And Steve Martin, his character, the father, sort of becomes the boyfriend, soon to be husband's competitor
Mm.
for his daughter's affections. And when you put it that way, it's really gross, isn't it? I hadn't seen it when I was, 13 watching that movie. So, it started, she sort of asked the question when the protector role blurs into something that is inappropriate or controlling over the daughter. And then I wondered, do mothers then compete with their daughters-in-law?
Mm.
And I'm not sure that doesn't definitely there are stories I've heard, but, it does seem more that protector role that is expected of the father, sort of becomes a weird competition in a lot of I mean, guess I've seen it now that I think about it. I have seen it in real life too, not just
Mm.
in, comedies.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think also, I mean, I'm English, and so I might be making massive assumptions, but I'm just gonna say it. But, like, it often seems like a lot of American culture has quite strange father-daughter things, and obviously that's a
Mhm.
sweeping assumption. I know America is basically pretty much like Europe
Well,
in
I
terms of
can
lots
make
of
a
different
sweeping
states with
assumption
different things.
back. I'll make a sweeping assumption back, and I think that's because British people tend culturally I mean, we hear, like, the stiff upper lip jokes, but I think you're much more reserved emotion-wise,
Mm.
whereas it comes out a lot more, I think, in maybe American families, even when the father's sort of like the brusque masculine guy.
Yeah. I think it's just, obviously these are probably quite extreme examples, but I always found it really crazy when you'd have those things like chastity pledges that fathers were kind of
Yeah.
making for their daughters, or kind of quite intense sort of, if you take my daughter to the prom, you know, you need to know I've got a gun or whatever. I know that's probably like obviously not what most Americans are like by any stretch. But they're quite ownership like. And I know that when I got married, I found it, I remember kind of examining a lot of the wedding traditions and thinking it's quite a weird idea that your partner should ask for your hand in marriage from your
Yeah.
father, that should be the first person to know if you're getting
Yeah.
married with your father and not you.
Right.
It's quite like when you sort of start to pick it, that's quite a strange idea in
Yeah.
modern
Yeah.
life when you're not, you know, getting a dowry and stuff.
Exactly, yeah. It is I mean, I could see maybe if the tradition was to ask both parents or to tell both parents what your plans are, but to ask the father only is a weird
Mm,
thing. Yeah.
yeah. And I do think so. We've got a comment. I do think that there can be some funniness with mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws. Sometimes I think when
Mhm.
I think about that it's almost because sometimes we can kind of view men as like men can be viewed as a resource. You know, we're not that far away from the generations where men were,
Mhm.
you know, a kind of valuable, you know, women were a valuable resource for producing babies and men were a valuable resource for um, hunting and fighting and
Yeah.
manly things. um, and I do think that there can, I think that definitely, when I was reading that bit, I think there's definitely competitiveness in the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, and father-son-in-law relationship
Mhm.
sometimes. Um, yeah, I think that is probably not unique to the father thing, but I think when the father does it, it can be more uncomfortable, or certainly how
Yeah.
Angel talked about it, because there's like a sexual undertone to it that I
Right.
don't think
Right.
is present maybe
And
in
the obvious example, which Angel goes into, is Donald Trump and his
Mm,
daughter Ivanka.
yeah.
Um, do you wanna read
Oh,
the
yeah.
quote about that? About
Yeah, well, I will
voice
never
of
be able to
God.
find it though. But it is a really weird quote, isn't it? Do you remember what page it was?
45.
45.
Yeah.
Ah,
She's
yes.
talking about,
Oh, yeah.
what Ivanka had to say about her father being
Yeah. So, in an interview in 2007, when her father was not yet a presidential candidate, but the host of The Apprentice, Ivanka Trump spoke about the ubiquity and enormity of his presence. Increasingly, and especially with the show, I've started to hear his voice everywhere I go. I'll be driving and I hear him come over the radio. I'll be sitting on my couch typing on my computer and I'll hear him on the television. Just this sort of voice of God in the background. It's actually kind of frightening as a daughter, which is quite interesting.
Yeah,
Frightening is, yeah,
yeah, to
quite
hear.
intense, isn't it?
Yeah, because I imagine it's frightening because it's unexpected, right? She hasn't
Mm,
prepared herself to hear his voice, um, which is if it's not something you want, if it's something you maybe are actively avoiding, then it's scary if it just, pushes its way into your life unexpectedly. But she goes on to defend him because later further
yeah,
down that page,
yeah,
at some point, an interviewer asked her about the quote about him when he said he could just grab women by the pussy.
yeah.
Um, she says
Yeah, she
that
says
yeah,
it's
go ahead.
clearly inappropriate and offensive, but then she adds that the greatest comfort I have is the fact that I know my father.
Yeah, as
Yeah.
if to me, that means she's indicating that the horrible things he said are just a performance and she knows him better,
Mm.
which even if it was a performance, which we know it's not, it's still totally inexcusable.
Yeah. But also, I think it's quite an interesting one. And I think that is actually a really interesting part of the Daddy Issues book. And I think you touched on it right at the beginning for what you were expecting from the book, is the idea that a daughter can vouch for their father, because in
Mm,
reality, I don't think you can. I don't
yeah.
think that who a man is in his family can necessarily
Yeah.
tell you who they are out in the world with other people and other
Yeah.
situations. I think she talks a lot about that from the angle of that maybe fathers are so protective of their daughters because they know
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
other men might be viewing their daughters, but then they can only know that if that's also how they view
Yeah.
women.
Yeah.
And maybe, I mean, you know, I mean, they might say, some men might say, well, that's actually because I know how my friends view other women. It's not how I view other women. But, you know, and obviously I'm not saying all men are like this, but
Yeah, but then the next statement, I think, or the next question for me is, why are those people your friends? Right? And
mm,
we need to push it a little further and um, make them accountable for even people you associate with, which of course ties in with the whole Epstein drama. Is it's not an excuse to say, well, I didn't do anything. Like, I knew he was a bad guy, but I didn't. That's still, it's not, still not okay.
yeah,
Um, so I think just, um, you know, insisting now that fathers not only, or men not only, are not abusive toward women, but also that they don't tolerate it from other men.
yeah,
I think that's what we need to demand, or what they should be offering.
yeah, no, definitely, definitely. I think also with the Ivanka Trump thing, it kind of makes me think of Prince Andrew as well, because you think, yeah, you wonder what Prince Andrew was actually like as a father, whether he
Mhm.
was, I don't know. It is, I think it's always like an interesting thing in general, is that you can't really ever know anyone, no matter how much you know them. And I
Mhm.
think with men, I think for women, with that, you know, the 65 million or something website, you know, this idea that
Yeah,
men were
yeah.
all Googling how,
Motherless
yeah,
website, yeah.
how can you drug a woman and all this kind of
Mhm.
stuff. And I think it's always kind of a woman's worst nightmare that you don't, that, you know, your father
Yeah,
could be this really great father to you, but
yeah.
you don't know
That's
what's going on
something,
in
it's
their heads.
that story from CNN, about the website where men, drug their wives and take photos and videos of it, we probably to rape them.
Hmm.
Um, that was really disorienting, I think, for a lot of us, even people, women, feminists who work in within these topics. I think learning that 65 million hits to that website in 1 month is mind-blowing, terrifying.
Mhm.
And I thought I started feeling sort of this way when I was reading the Giselle Pellicot memoir, because just learning that there were 70 odd men within driving distance of this small French village willing
Mm.
to do this to one woman.
Mm.
I mean, what does that tell you if you just
Yeah.
magnify that across the world? It's not a unique place, right?
No.
So, I find myself looking at every man I pass on the street thinking, "Is would he do that?"
Mm.
Um, but, um, did I ask myself, "Would my dad do that, or would my husband do that?" I I think, I hope not, but, I mean, how do all these men get away with it if, you know, there's gotta be women in their lives who don't suspect anything, who would be shocked to learn this.
Yeah, it is a really I think Angel sort of she kind of touches on that quite a lot in the book, the aspect that of this risk factor of that in order to exist as a woman in the world.
Mhm.
And to be fair, as a little boy as well, because little boys do suffer abuse too. You have to fundamentally believe and have faith in your father and your brothers and your
Mhm.
husband and all these different people. Otherwise, life would be unbearable. and you just
Yeah.
have to have faith, and you have to also rely on them to not do these things because of the reality that men are in general stronger than women.
Mhm,
Not always,
mhm.
obviously, but sometimes,
Yeah.
statistically more. And I think that angle of how your protector is also your predator is
Yeah.
quite scary, isn't it?
Yeah. Just the possibility, and there's not really anything you can do to quell that.
No.
I think we just know what kind of world we live in, and
I
we
think also that element, which I don't know that she actually talks about in the book at all. Does she have a bit in the book where she talks about someone actually being abused by their father? There is obviously the the uh,
the film
the
or
film,
sorry, the
the
book
book
about,
is, but it's a
yeah.
slightly different because it's not different. It is abuse, but she's not a child at home. As in, I think quite often in very serious estrangements, you will have someone, I think, who goes to their family members and says, I have been abused by
Mhm,
my father, my brother. Um, and then everyone in the family disbelieves them. And I think that's
mhm,
something that people don't acknowledge enough. I think people
mhm.
publicly say, oh, people always believe. Um,
Yeah.
there's been that quite high profile one recently with Sam Altman, the
Mhm. Yeah.
which he's one of the AI companies,
Yeah. Who
one
cares?
of them. And his sister has said that he abused her when she was
Mhm.
a child, and his family have all rounded against her that she's made
Yeah.
it up.
Yeah.
Obviously, no one can know. It's impossible to know. But I think it is quite a worrying thing that within families that people will often be. It is so shocking to
Yeah.
acknowledge that
Yeah.
it's so necessary to believe that you know
Yeah.
the patriarch of a family and the
Yeah.
brothers of the family, so they could not have
No.
done these things,
Yeah.
that people will actually round on the person who's making the claim that the thing has
Yeah. I
happened because
think
it's just impossible.
incest is, something that I think incites that feeling for a
Mm.
lot of people, and just 2 episodes ago on the Bad Mothers podcast, I interviewed a woman who had the
Yeah,
same
I listened to
experience
that
you just
one.
described, Sharon. And I think that, again, not to keep bringing up the Pellico case, but it applies there as well. That's sort of the divide between mother and daughter that's described in both memoirs is the daughter, believes that she was a victim of her father's abuse too, and the mother, at least at the time of the memoir, was not able to concede that yet.
Mm.
Um and I don't know if that was, because she was feeling protective toward her daughter, or it was just something too shocking to consider, or she, just needed to believe that her husband wouldn't cross that boundary. Who knows? But I think it just goes to show, like you said, that that's such a difficult thing to believe that someone close to you would do. And yet it does happen, and I feel like we maybe are leaving people on a cliff edge with our reference to the book
Mm.
about,
Yeah.
incest, and that one was The Kiss, right?
Yeah, it was the kiss. So it's really disturbing. True. I've never read it. I'm not sure I would read it.
Yeah,
I want to because I feel like she should have people validate and read her story, but I don't know that I could do it.
yeah,
Um, but that it's a true story. I'm just flicking through, see if I can find it. But it was this poor girl, her father leaves her her with her mother when she's really little, I think, pretty much
yeah,
born, I think. And the mother sinks into a kind of deep depression. She describes kind of all these bits of trying to get her mother to wake up, trying to like lift up her
mhm,
mother's eye mask, but then realizing that even when the eye mask is lifted, the mother's eyes are closed and the mother just
mhm,
won't see her. So kind of the Winnicott thing and the Bechdel thing,
yeah,
wanting to be seen. Um, wanting to be mirrored.
mhm,
And so the grandparents raise her. It's a true story. And then when she's 18, the father reappears in her life. And he really sees her, and apparently in the book, he follows her around just watching her all the time.
Mm.
And then they start a relationship, a sexual relationship, in as much as it can be a relationship when one person is so vulnerable and needing of love.
Yeah.
Um, and I think Angel references that there is a rape scene also in the book. But what I found so disturbing about it is you read that and you think, oh, this poor poor woman, like
Mhm.
both your parents like let you down so phenomenally, and then your father finally shows up just when you're really showing up when you're just kind of
Yeah.
18 and taking your adulthood from you, kind of
Yeah.
destroying your relationship with your body and yourself. When he's not even been there. Well, there's no time where that's appropriate, but he's shows up at exactly that point and then takes you.
Mhm.
Um, and that then the reviewers apparently of the book at the time were really critical of her for
Mm.
writing the book, for kind of airing her,
Yeah.
her dirty laundry, or creating this tawdry story that she should have kept it private. And
Mm.
I think that
Mhm.
shows you like how we're getting better as a society, but we are so uncomfortable with. I
Yeah.
think we can just about sort of tolerate sexuality crossing into family life if it's a little child, because that's like an obvious, there's a like it's very obvious who is the victim, even though it
Right.
is always obvious who is the victim. It should always be obvious that a parent is
Yeah,
always in the wrong in at
but
any
because
age.
she was this woman was 18, then somehow the reviewers cast blame on her.
Yeah, that she
Um,
willingly
yeah,
participated, which I don't think
yeah.
he.
And it's sort of it ties back in, I think, with the, one of the things we talk about with estrangement is the power dynamic even when we're adults. The parent still has power over us because we grew up with them as the parent. They're the parent. So, there's a sense always that they're in charge. And I think that's often not acknowledged in some estrangement discussions because we're talking about, maybe a 60-year-old and a 30-year-old. So they're both adults, right? But that power dynamic is still there in the same way, you know, a, a male superior at work has more power than a subordinate in an office environment or work environment. Same with the Harvey Weinstein stories and Epstein and all of that. That power dynamic is what makes it unfair, no matter whether the victim is also of legal age. I guess we can tie that also into the recent news with Russell Brand. Um, yeah, the age or consent doesn't matter when those other power dynamics are at
Yeah,
play.
yeah. Yeah, I think in the first bit with family estrangement, I think it can definitely feel to a parent that there is an unequal power dynamic, in that the once the child is an adult, it's a bit like the sort of famous Cat Stevens song, Cats in the Cradle, where it's kind of
Mhm,
when a child's little, they need the parent. When the child grows up, the parent needs a child quite often.
mhm,
That is kind of like a switch in the power dynamic. And I think often because the parent needs the child more, or the child is a more central, an adult child is perhaps a more central person in a parent's life, because the parent is no longer the person, with a really busy life. They're perhaps
mhm,
retired, they're perhaps, and the child has now potentially got their own family and is not so dependent on their original family.
mhm.
So the power can seem imbalanced. I can definitely see from a parent's point of view how a child can have that power to just cut off, to just say,
Yeah,
this is,
yeah,
I'm uncontactable. But I think on a psychic level, the power is still less,
yeah,
that in so imbalanced, as in
yeah,
I think parents have more power emotionally and psychologically over their adult child than they perhaps think they do.
Mhm.
Um, and that they're perhaps not recognizing. But I still think it kind of almost comes back to the bit that you talked about earlier about the capacity to love. And how, what was it? It was quite a good quote, which I will try and find again. But that essentially the idea that,
If you need love, you can't
yeah,
create life, something like that.
if you're the kind of person who needs love, chances are you're not the kind of person who has the wherewithal to create it. Um, in that, I think the moment in a loving relationship things become about power, that is
Mhm.
that is corrosive of the relationship itself. So I guess, um, sometimes things have been set in motion of power struggles, and maybe that's how you know how to relate to each other, and that can echo on into adulthood and keep
Yeah,
going. I'm not saying that there aren't. I think estrangement is extremely complex, and there's
yeah,
so many types of estrangement, so many stories. But I think viewing love as a resource that you have power struggles over is always going to be unhealthy
yeah,
and more likely to lead to estrangement.
yeah, yeah. What about this idea of whether it's possible to see fathers as nurturing caregivers? Because that's sort of, if we want, um, equality, if we want or to achieve equality, then fathers need to be able to offer the same sort of nurturing that mothers are expected to provide. So some of the examples that Angel goes through in the book on, this idea is she goes back to the old Grimm's fairy tales,
Mm, mm.
which we know now are still kind of dark, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, those stories are not great. They're not they're not conveying great messages to kids, but, um, we see a lot of evil stepmothers, but, there used to be stories that have faded out over time, she says, that, had incestuous fathers included in the stories, which is not something I knew, but apparently
No.
and we can see I guess the point of that of bringing that up is that over time as a culture, I guess we have eliminated the stories of the evil fathers, but not the evil mothers.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that is quite an interesting one. I found that really interesting. So, just to explain further, it was essentially that in the old fairy tales, they generally, I think she said there were about 50-50 that
Mhm,
the evil protagonist would be either an evil stepmother or incestuous father or a
mhm,
sexually predatory father. And the princess or princess and prince would be trying to escape.
mhm,
Um, and that those were faded out. And I think it's interesting because sexual abuse, even as a concept, is quite a new in terms of, I think it was only kind of just after the war that child abuse really became like a properly recognized thing. Um, maybe World War One, World War Two. And bearing in mind, wasn't it in France only a few years ago or something where like the age of consent got raised from I think 14 or something, and
mhm.
that it was like
Yeah,
quite a lot more accepted that an older person would initiate very young people into sex. Um, so I think it's interesting because it's like it's something that was kind of cleansed for a while and then re-acknowledged as a thing.
mhm,
And I wonder if the removal of it from storybooks was part of that cleansing, but obviously also just practically, I mean, no one's going to want to read their child as a story where the evil protagonist is the actual parent. I think a step
yeah,
parent is like a safe one because they're not you, unless you are
yeah,
a step parent, in which case you wouldn't want to read a story about evil step parents. But like in general, it's a safer topic. But I think it's
yeah,
also part. Maybe it was. It'd be really interesting to know when that cleanse happened, whether it was the
mhm,
Victorians or
yeah,
whether it was driven by discomfort of having sexuality in a children's story, or whether it was driven by not wanting to acknowledge incest as something that existed or
Mm.
exists. Yeah.
And then she goes into sort of how fathers are cast as overbearing, uh, critical, and how that sort of is at odds, as we were saying before, about letting the child see the parent as another. Um, and then the idea that it is, if your father has that sort of persona, then you can't really play, or you're mostly afraid of them, and so it's hard to love somebody that you are scared of, I guess.
Mm.
So taking away persona of the father as the, scary patriarch would benefit, or improve the relationships between father and daughter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was reading quite an interesting article today, actually, in the Atlantic about father-daughter relationships, where it
Mhm.
said that fathers spend more time with their sons on average, and that really escalates in the teen years quite
Mm.
substantially. And partly it's driven by fathers being uncomfortable with their daughter going through puberty and not knowing
Mhm.
how to deal with it. I think in that respect, it is extremely, I imagine, extremely tricky for fathers, because men are so much more sexualized, I guess, in society, that I guess that it must be tricky if you're a father and being like, oh, my daughter's going through puberty. How do I be loving and affectionate with her without seeming like I'm being
Yeah.
inappropriate? Like, whether that is perhaps some of the driver that a
Mm.
father can feel more comfortable to be
Yeah.
affectionate with a son. Um, and I
Interesting,
guess
yeah.
because there's all these things like we've talked about the concept of fathers as, yeah. Mm.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it does sort of paint a complicated picture for fathers, but in the end, I think the point of the book is that just using the term daddy issues paints the daughters as the ones responsible for father's wrongdoing, right? So we have the big example of The Kiss, that book that we discussed, where, the daughter who experiences abuse is sort of held to account by the public, um, for for being abused by her father, where was the critique of the father. Um, but then we have this idea that, girls who have daddy issues are a problem, but mama's boys are sort of a good thing.
Well,
Um,
I definitely think I think mummy's boy is derogatory, but I think that the idea with the mummy's boy is that it's the mother's fault.
yes,
If you
yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean, it's kind of like the mother's
yeah,
created a mummy's boy.
yeah.
He's just an innocent victim who's been made into a mummy's boy.
Mhm.
And whereas the daughter makes herself into a
Yes, yeah,
daddy issues girl.
yeah.
To either way. I think that, though, is again with estrangement and with families in general, that just the weight of family life is
Mm,
very heavily on the woman in a family
yeah,
in general. You
yeah, and
see
if
that
anything
often.
goes wrong, it's her fault.
Yeah, if your son estranges, it's his wife's fault. Sometimes it maybe is, but
Mhm,
it's disproportionately, you see that in the press, it's generally the wife or girlfriend. And
mhm,
if if anything kind of goes wrong, it's the mother's fault, or it's more heavily on a daughter than a son or a father. I think things are improving, but very slowly.
yeah. I guess since we only have a couple minutes left, I'll just invite anyone to have, if they have any comments about the book or anything we talked about, you can share them in the chat.
Mm.
Um, but if you haven't read the book yet, I really recommend it. Like I said,
Mm.
it's a super fast read. It's
Yeah, it is really fast, and
yeah.
it has a good mix of interesting anecdotes and It's not a comfortable book, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I
I
think the
think
thing that she does really well is she references all these other films and books and researchers, but she does a great job distilling the
mm,
what each of them are all about in just a few pages and explaining how it fits into her overall argument. So you don't have to have seen or read
no.
anyone that she references in order to follow the argument. And real I mean, it's created a new reading list for me, but I appreciate that it's explained so clearly because I have a feeling a lot of the, like, psychology and philosophy stuff will go over my head anyway, it'll be too complicated, but
Well, yeah, I think I almost feel with the Winnicott Bechdel bit, I had to go back to it and reread it to quite understand the point of the two different things. Like as in, I'd say in a way that was like a kind of there was very interesting points she made, but they didn't
mm,
necessarily. You had to do a bit of your own jumping to work out the point of them.
yeah,
But I think, yeah, the tying together of contemporary issues, and she had a whole section on Virginia Woolf as well, which was quite interesting.
yeah, oh,
Didn't
we
even
didn't
touch
touch on
that.
that, but yeah, that was great as well. Yeah, so
Yeah.
definitely worth the read.
Yeah, no. And I think anyone who reads it will have bits where you think of, you know, some generation of men in your family and some of the
Mhm.
things they might have done or said, or the way they perhaps looked at women or talked about women, and you'll be like, oh
Yeah,
my
that
gosh,
you
yeah,
just
that was.
don't yeah, you don't realize because it's
Mm,
so ingrained in all of us, so it helps to get
yeah,
that perspective on it.
yeah,
And I think our plan going forward is to, keep this up on Substack Live rather than the Zoom calls,
yeah.
but still every other month. So we'll need to pick our next book soon for
Mhm.
our, June event.
Yeah, it would be really great to know as well from anyone who's either listening now or who listens to the recording, what would be useful for people, what kinds of books people would like us to talk about. And
Mm,
also, I'm wondering whether people want, I don't know, like what kind of structure would be helpful to people,
mhm.
whether we maybe needed to explain more about the book at the beginning of this or any feedback is just really
Yeah,
useful.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, any feedback is appreciated,
Yeah.
and you can get in touch with either of us, via our Substacks. Mine is Bad Mothers and Tam.
And mine is family estrangement. So yeah, I try to cover estrangement from both sides. So whatever side you're on in estrangement, just don't worry. It's a really safe space I've tried
Yeah,
to create where I don't a no judgment space. That's the aim.
yeah. Yeah, I think you've done a great job with that, and I enjoy reading it. I write about things other than estrangement alongside estrangement, but I do come at it from the adult child perspective.
Yeah.
So, I'm more biased than Sam. So,
Well, I find it really interesting to read each person's point of view, and I don't think that at all there's anything wrong with taking a stance.
mm,
I'm just trying to not take a stance mostly because I tend to be able to see like each side. So I
mm,
find it impossible. The more I learn about people's estrangements, the more I'm like, oh my goodness,
yeah,
there isn't a
yeah,
side I could take.
yeah.
It's so complex. So yeah.
All right, well, thanks everyone for joining,
Yeah, thank you.
and thank you, Tam.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. Thanks for organizing it.
Bye.
All right, bye.